Hey everybody, Dan with Pixel FX here. Going to do a install on a 50001 PS2 with the new Retro Gem PS2 digital kit. I'm going to try and make this a quick video, but we'll see how long it comes out to be. Pretty much what you get with the kit, you get your flexes, your antenna, your hookup boards, and your mounts. You'll need miscellaneous screwdrivers to do this. So let's go ahead and get started. I've already actually taken the shell off on this case. It has two broken screw bosses. So I just wanted to, show you guys that because these screws are going to fall out. I just wanted to open it up to make sure it wasn't roach infested, which it's not. So, but first we pull off all these tops. So these two, I already pulled those screws out. I'm just going to set all my stuff up here. And these just come off. You can use a little small flathead screwdriver too to pull them off. And I'm going to use just a little quick drill here to pull the screws out. The four long ones go in here in this section. And there's three really short screws. They go in here. And then there's one medium screw goes there. Why that one's silver? I don't know. Okay, let's get this last one out. With the fat, I like to kind of consider this like a dance when you're holding the console and messing with it. So I'm going to show you exactly how I would do it. So we'll set the console on its top, and we'll pull it off. A couple key things here, and then keep the top close to you. This thing, when we unscrew it, this thing is a magnet to the ground and will fall off and pull this FFC cable back here if it's not supported. So if you unscrew these screws, it's going to fall off. I almost guarantee it. So what I like to do is I like to remove a couple things up here. So we'll go ahead and pull these two screws out right here. And I'm going to leave the fan in. Not going to pull it out yet. And then I'm also going to pull, since that's done, I'm going to go ahead and slide this back in underneath this. It's a little tight, but it'll fit. And then I'm going to remove this. And then what I say is, if this is removed and this top is off, never leave your hand off this piece, off the controller. Always hold it. Because the time that you let go is the time that it will fall off. So I'm going to gently take my hand off, and I'm going to slide the top back on, and I'm going to flip it upside down. So now because removing those screws allowed us to take the bottom of the case off, like so. And so the next steps are just some basic disassembly. Tear down the power supply. And get to underneath this shield. So let's go ahead and do this. Now these instructions are really only for the 50,000 series only. The 39,000 has a flip power supply that sits up top, and the board can't sit, so that's why the 39,000 needs a power supply swap or one of the PS2s, 12-volt adapters. So we're just going to pull these four bolts off, or nuts, screws, whatever. Remove that. Don't shock yourself. We'll pull the bottom plastic off. This is important. Don't lose it. Keep it with the heat shield, or keep it with the power supply. And this just comes off. Set that to the side. So next steps is we can take the fan off. Go ahead and pull it up. And then, so now this is completely free. So you can take it off if you want to. See, I can just rotate it like this. The controller's still up there, so it can't go anywhere. And then this just pushes down. Just held in by plastic. We can take that to the side. I'm going to set this back in its shell. Why I like to keep it in the shell is I don't disconnect the CD-ROM or the DVD drive from the motherboard. I feel like these these connectors over here are really weak. The backers like to come off, so I do not touch them. I just leave them how they are. So next steps are we need to remove all of these screws on this motherboard. These two screws are different. They have more of like a plastic thread. So just keep these a little bit separate. I'm just going to use a little power screwdriver here. And there is a lot of pieces, parts. So there's just a lot of finesse with this. Okay. And also I guess I'll talk about the soldering when we get over to the bench, but I feel like this should be done with lead-free solder. The current process is lead-free on the board, so if you use leaded solder, you need to make sure they're really mixed really well, or you totally wash the lead-free solder off before you apply the leaded. But we'll get to that over there at the bench. So now that this is free, there's clips right here that hold it in. So I kind of just try and, sometimes they come off easy, sometimes they don't. If they don't, like this one's not, I just take a little flathead screwdriver, lift this part up like this, and just kind of go underneath, lift up, like so. And once you get it up, there's also the front. And then lifts right off. So the motherboard's currently free. It still has this connected and this, and that's why I leave it in this, because I don't usually mess with any of this stuff. I just leave it there. So I'll actually do all my soldering in the case like this, and I find it's just easier than taking the board out. Because what you're going to find is if you have a problem, you need to put the board back in, plug out everything in to test it. It's easier to do it this way. But before we get to that, there's a couple things that we need to do, or at least one thing we need to do in this is we need to remove this little Toslink bracket. So I'm just going to take it, move this back a little bit. I'm just going to take it and just bend it back and forth and just snap it off. Nothing special. Trying not to bend the case too much so it doesn't warp at all, but that's pretty much all it needs. And that's the case modifications done for this. For the Toslink, there's a super simple way to remove it. It's not desoldering it. You actually can just take it and just pull it back. Okay, maybe they changed it. Let's see here. I've done this way a few times now, and it really wasn't a problem, but okay, that's not coming off. On some previous ones, I'm able to... Lost my mic. On some previous models, I was able just to kind of pull that off, just like no problems. So they maybe they changed the design. Looks the same. Let me see. Try this again. Yeah, I'm not going to put any more pressure on that. On the previous ones, I was able just to barely put any force on it, and it just pulls the pins out. There's like a sleeve and a female sleeve in there that the pins grab to, and it just pulls that sleeve out. And you actually can, the port's not destroyed, you can push the pins back in. But since this is not coming out, I'm going to desolder it, I guess, or let me try a little screwdriver method, because I am not going to put this Toslink back in. Nope, it's totally breaking. So we're just going to go ahead and break it off. Feel free not to do that if you want to preserve it. But I'm just going to just kind of snip it off here and cut through those. And that way I don't have to desolder it. Let's try and get here. pry that up a little bit. There we go. Twisted it. So that just broke those off at the bottom. Be forewarned. I mean, don't necessarily do that if it doesn't want to come. Might have to desolder it. But I'm not putting this back on, so I don't really worry about preservation of that. Also, you either need a spacer or you take the spacer off when you put it back together. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this off right here. And I'm just going to set it right here with my kit. Because there's a little bit of a gap there when the shield goes back on. So now that that's off, our soldering is going to be around in this area and then up here. So with that said, we're pretty much ready to go over to the scope or to the soldering and put on some flex cables. Oh, before we do that, what I do is I'm going to put these screws back into the shield, the heat shield. Just kind of, not necessarily tight, but just enough to keep the heat sink onto the top of the board. Reason being is I'm going to test it with the bottom off. And, you know, use the wrong one. No, this is the right one. The reason it's just safer that way. That way the heatsink doesn't come disconnected, and then if you're running it for too long without the heatsink, you know, you do damage. So I just screw it on and just leave it at that. All right, I'm going to jump over to the scope. All right, now that we're set over here at the scope, we're going to do a little bit of soldering. There are a few components that we need to remove. They're in the DAC section. So we need to remove this resistor, this cap, this resistor, and this cap. This resistor might need to be moved. Just has to depend on the revision. It can be kind of in the way. Sometimes it's not. Also, this is a crystal right here that's pretty large. You can solder the flex in over the crystal. But you can see it really pushes up. Like I said, it's possible to solder it. I've done it multiple times, but it just really gets in the way. So I recommend grabbing this part. This is a DigiKey part. It's at 18.4320 megahertz. Little SMD replacement crystal. It's pretty accurate. So we're just going to replace that crystal with this much flatter one, and just make installing it significantly easier. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all these components, and let's do that real quick. I'm just going to apply a little bit of liquid flux. Then I'm going to take a small little chisel tip. I mentioned before about using lead-free solder versus leaded. On this type of stuff, I'm going to use leaded because it's not staying on the board. I'm just going to kind of heat these up and move these out of the way. Make sure I don't lose focus too much here for you guys. Just don't push it into the pins. Or if you have hot tweezers, that's something to use here too. I'm going to remove this resistor. I'm going to remove this cap. Okay, and then we're going to pull this guy off. We add some solder. There's a couple different ways to do this since it's on both sides. You can kind of try and heat, I can try this, I'm probably not going to be very good at it, but you can kind of heat both sides of it and maybe lift it off. Yeah, there it goes, just kind of going back and forth. But hot tweezers are really nice in this type of situation. There we go. Because obviously you don't want to pull those pads off, otherwise you're doing a much bigger board repair. So let me just clean up some of this. And then we'll just drop our, go ahead and just clean this area up a little bit. Just before we put it down. Oh, you guys totally missed it. All right, so there we're back in focus. It doesn't matter which direction this crystal goes. It's yeah, it doesn't matter. And so I'm going to use leaded solder on this. I'm just going to solder it in, nothing special. Okay. And then the next step is I'm going to do the controller flex, which is the small flex. Then it's by far probably, I would say, the hardest part to do on this kit. There is going to be a supplemental document that allows you to do this by a wired install, because this is pretty tough with the lead-free solder, and this FFC connector really loves to suck the solder up, and it's obviously super tiny too. So there's that. But this aligns on what I'm going to call, I guess that's pin 1, but I'm going to call this pin 1. I don't know how many pins the connector is. So I'm going to go on this 4th pin right here. Let me make sure we're nice and focused okay. And you can see I'm kind of going above that resistor. I do not recommend going like this on top of the pins. It looks like it's like a good idea, but it's so easy to get a solder bridge underneath there. I mean, and then it's almost impossible to remove it. So I'm going to hold that with my fingers like that. I need to put some, I would actually use probably better flux than liquid flux on this. But I'm going to add a little bit of liquid flux, and I'm just going to kind of try and prep these pins a little bit. And I'm just trying to make sure that I can apply heat to it and just kind of wake this solder up a little bit. My iron right now is pretty hot. It's at 370, but this is a real fine tip, so it can't apply a ton of heat as it only has so much of a contact area, but you kind of need this extra heat when you do you know, lead-free soldering. So I'm just kind of waking these pins up. You can see this old flux in there that's kind of burning up. So I'm not adding any flux yet or any solder yet, but I'm going to now. This is the solder I'm going to use. It's 99.3 to 0.7. I'm just going to put a little bit on my tip, and I can't even exaggerate what little is. Like, it's just like a tiny dot, because let me clean it off a little bit. Because it's so easy to bridge this, and if you bridge it, you just have to take the flex off and clean it off and try again. But like I said, there will be a document that tells you how to wire to these components over here directly with wires to the board. Now, why I didn't include a flex for this components over here is because each motherboard revision is different, and this allows one cable to work on all the FATs. So that's kind of the purpose for that. So we're going to line it up. I'm just going to kind of, not drag solder, but just kind of swipe up and down real tiny. And you can see I just got a couple, my thing out of here. I got a couple good joints already. I lifted my hand up there. And now we're going to kind of push this side down a little bit over this resistor. And kind of do the same thing. Kind of get over here. And since our iron is hotter still, 370 degrees, maybe a little hot, I could probably turn it down a little bit. But you just have to be quicker. But I'm just going to make sure that I get good penetration to all these joints. You can kind of see let me add a little bit more solder to this. Because what can also happen is if you don't put enough solder down, you'll pull solder up from the board, and then the entire controller will be disconnected. So you won't get a signal on your PS2 either. So you just, like I said, I'm not drag soldering. I'm just kind of putting my iron in and out with solder on it, and it's making a pretty good connection. And so let's go ahead and zoom in on that and see really what we're looking like, because I have the microscope. And those look okay. Let's quit moving the camera here. Wow. Back out a little bit. Those look okay. This one on the right here doesn't look like it's making good contact. You can kind of see how it has that black halo. That one's kind of suspicious, but these all have pretty good joints. I'll double check that one too. I'm just, like I said, on this controller flex, it needs to be like a pin by pin operation. Put a little bit more solder on. This is a ground pin, I'm pretty sure, right here, so it's going to take a little bit more heat. I'm just going to touch them all up because I'm zoomed in now. And that's pretty much the controller flex. I'm going to do a quick double check with my multimeter, because these are just, the PS2 is, it's just a pain to tear down. So it's faster in the long run to check now for bridges and shorts and things than it is to just chance it and, whatever. So you can see my meter right here, making contact. I'm just going to check each one. And we're good there, so I'm going to check the top of these. Make sure I get good connection. Okay. So that section's done. I'll do a little bit of a cleanup, but with this type of flux, it almost doesn't need any cleanup because it's just alcohol essentially, and just evaporates. You notice I didn't even plug the FFC connector on that board or on this controller. I don't see any harm to leaving it there, but if you want to pull it off, do it. All right, let's go back to the main flex now. Zoom back out. So let's go ahead and clean up some of this solder that we left on the board. I'm just going to take some solder braid, drop a little liquid flux down. I'm just going to clean up these spots real quick. And then while we're also here, I'm going to prep the audio chip so we can get good adhesion to that. I'm doing what I did before on the controller, just kind of applying some heat. You can see kind of that old solder, rosin, whatever you want to call it, flux kind of boiling up. Just tapping all the pins. And I'm going to do the same thing around this whole entire chip here. So if you do a solder, if you don't want to use lead-free solder, you got two options. Your options are to add leaded solder to this and swipe back and forth a bunch of times to where the solder mixes. Essentially, is if you have two kind of flat planes of solder, and one is different, enough thermal expansion, it's going to create a crack. So you may do the mod, and it may seem fine, and then down the road, you may have a cracked joint that gives you a bad signal. So I would almost just use I would use the lead-free solder. I think you're going to have a lot less issues in the long run. So we're going to go ahead and just clean up around these edges right here. These resistor packs in here. And by clean up, I mean just wake the solder up a little bit, kind of like I was doing before. Just kind of going back and forth, not swiping. I don't have any solder on my iron or on my tip right now. I'm just trying to make sure I got good wettability to the existing solder. And you can do a total wash, and that's essentially where you remove all of the lead-free solder and then replace it with leaded. That does work pretty good. If you don't do the leaded, that's what I would recommend. Just keep putting more flux down. If you use better flux, you probably won't need to do this as many times as me. This type of flux just kind of melts fast, or not melts, but evaporates. And then we're going to go up here and touch these pins. Zoom in just a little bit. Get a little bit closer. Get an angle right here. I'm just going to see just kind of that. Kind of just bringing that solder back alive. Some of these are ground, so they may take a little more heat. Then we're going to come to this side, do the same thing. And there's not much at the tip of these, if you notice. The pad is very small for this QFP chip. Okay. All right. Now we're pretty much prepped here. This little pad right here can become a problem. This one right here. That will sometimes want to short out to this pin we're going to solder to, which is the horizontal sync pin, and it will cause it not to work. So I'm going to require Captain tape, and you just need the tiniest of a square of Captain tape to do this. So I'm just going to take a little tiny piece, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. So I cut it. And I guess you probably don't have to set it down now, but I just wanted to demonstrate where it needs to go. It's almost too big for that right there. So we actually need to solder to this part of this resistor, so I need to make this a little bit smaller. Or if you have some other type of conformal coating, you could spray something on, but just make sure you double check for shorts. Let's get this off. Make sure we can still see here. And we're just going to kind of try and butt it up flat here. And it'll stay in place once we put the flex on top. It won't go anywhere. Okay. Let me get set up here. We're going to want to solder to this side of the flex first. Right here. You essentially want this up as far as it can go. All right. And we'll kind of do the same procedure as the flex. I'm going to add some flux. I'm not going to add any solder to my iron yet. I'm just going to get the alignment. Make sure you guys can see that. And I'm going to solder on the middle of this. And I want this to be as forward as possible. having trouble getting that pushed up, so looks like I'm gonna do this down here first, so I can get this closer. I'm just gonna touch these, and that just pulled that right in. So we're gonna sit here, and now we're gonna look at how our alignment is up here. It looks like we're hitting that cap, so I think we need to pull that cap off and move it over just a little bit. I'll make a revision to the flex, so hopefully that's not an issue with any future kits. So before I do that, let's go ahead and I'm going to pull this cap off and move it just a centimeter. Let's see if I can get it with this iron. Yeah, there it went. And we're just going to keep that out of the way for now, and we're going to solder it back on. I'm just going to get this alignment right here. You can see where those pins want to go. Add some more flux. I haven't put any solder on my iron yet. I'm just getting it prepped. I'm just trying to get good tack adhesion. All right, there's that. Let's come to this side. Just going to try and solder a little bit on there. Put some flux down. Just working my way around. And like I said, you can drag, and I will end up drag soldering on this, but I'm just trying to just kind of wake some of this solder up and make sure we get good contact. And we'll go ahead and do a little bit of solder over here. And then we're going to solder this cap back on. This is the ground right here, so it's pretty strong to get heated up. Add some solder here. I'm just going to use leaded on this, or lead-free, I mean, on this cap, because it's easy to do it. It's not a problem. And then just solder the other side to this little castellation. Let's see here. Next steps is, you can see this little, this guy's okay. This is for a different revision of motherboard. There's another hookup over there, so just leave that as is. Now we just need to go up and clean up all these joints. So I'm going to zoom in for this. I'll show you what we're going to do, or how we're going to do this. You can see we still have our Captain tape under here. So we're good there. I'm going to add more flux. And now I'm going to add just a tiny bit of solder to my iron, my chisel tip here, or not my chisel tip, my spade, or what you want to call it. My knife tip. And I'm just going to tap here, tap, but kind of just try and do this without creating bridges. That's the goal. Let me get some more solder in here. Not really getting good heat transfer. That's the negative. It's hard to get good looking joints with lead free, but you can. There we go. Just kind of going up and down, not trying to go too extreme. And you can see I've got some nice little fillets on all of those heads, so we're going to stop there. And we're going to work our way over to this now. More flux, even though there's flux there, just you can never have enough. And this you can actually kind of drag solder pretty easily. This section right here. You can see I just went through that real fast. And I've got some bridges here. So let's clear that bridge. The bridges are a little bit harder to see with lead free because they're just not as shiny. So make sure you really inspect your joints good if you're doing it this way. There we go. That's cleared. Let's go ahead and zoom in and just take a look at all these. Those all look okay. It's real easy to get a joint right here that you can't really see. I didn't have any, but it's like I said, it's easy. And so let's go ahead and work our way on this guy. This right here is a ground layer. These 4 pins, so these are all going to be bridge, so don't worry about that. But these 2 pins are important. So, you know, don't bridge them. All right, that looks pretty good. Got some nice fillets on there. So, before we go any farther, I'm just going to do a quick double check for shorts with my probes. So my short right there is 225 ohm. So there's actually not a short there. This is just a power plane. So that's okay. And I'm still going to check for shorts on these. Because it's just faster to do this than it is to take the board back out. I'm just going to touch every one of these just to make sure I don't get any beeps. This is the Pixel bus. So all these have to be good. See, looks like I got something there. See what my short is. It's 90 ohm, so it's not a direct short. That may be how it is on the chip, but let me, maybe there's a little tiny bridge I can't see there. So let me clean it up. Let's see if that makes any difference. Yep. See how that short was gone? So I had a bridge right there. It was a 90 ohm bridge, so very weak connection, but there was a bridge and it looked completely clear. So, and that's just why we do this. Because what would happen is, well, you'd be able to diagnose it. Let's say you got this back installed. There would be probably an X on these 2 pins. Not sure what this is. Maybe the blue channel. So maybe in like blue 3 and 4 would have an X on it because they were shorted together. So let's go ahead and jump over here. Make sure we don't have any shorts on this guy. And we're okay. Okay. Now I may make that look easy, but it's not an easy task. This is very much, I would say, advanced soldering. I'm not trying to inflate my own skill. I just don't. I want people to, understand that it could be a little difficult. So now we need to solder the flex cable to these audio pins. So we got this little guy right here. We're going to apply some flux real quick. And what I'll do is, see if I can get this all in one shot. I usually just pick this up. It wraps around. I just hold it with my hand like this, so it's in the vicinity. I just push it in with my fingers. I kind of just hold it there with my finger. And I'm just going to take my iron, not going to add any flux yet, or any solder. I'm just going to try and get this to tack in. I get 2 pins before I let my finger off. Let's get a different angle here. Get too much reflection off that. Still using lead free for this. This would be an easy pin to solder wash, but alright, now that I have that, I'm going to push this down just a hair so it sits flatter. Okay, and then once that's done, just kind of flatten out with your finger, however it lays, however it wants to lay. No problem. And then add a little bit, this one looks like a little weak connection. Add a little bit more solder to that. And then, so now we need to run this signal right here to 5 volts. This, on some setups, the regulator sits right here, and you're able to solder that directly onto that leg, but it's not, so we need to solder 5 volts to this. So this is actually 5 volts right here. This comes around, so we can solder directly to this if we want to, or if we want a longer wire, you can solder to that. I'm just going to solder, just use 30 gauge solid core. It doesn't really, this is not a high amperage circuit, so it doesn't need a lot of juice. Sometimes it's easier just to put just one solid piece of wire right there, but I'm gonna show you kind of how I can do some of these solid cores pretty easily. First thing, I'm going to use leaded solder for this because it's clean. And probably I'll, depending how this lays, I'll put some Captain under that spot right there. I don't want that to short out to anything. I'm just going to solder that. I got a better view here. And then for this length, I'm just going to take this, I'm just going to, man, these little razor blades are real crappy. I'm going to cut on the top of this. Let me see what we're doing here. At the right angle. Alright. I'm just going to take this and just bend it. Like so. And then I'm just going to, so it still has the shielding on it. I'm just going to melt some of the shielding back. I pulled that wire off too much. It's just too small. It's okay. My iron's actually pretty hot still. Let me turn this back down. Let's put some solder on here. Clean up. I got some shielding that pulled off. Okay, so still going to put a piece of Captain underneath that area, just microscopic piece. Give me 1 second here. I'll pull this off. Just getting a piece here. Hold on. Almost got it. I'm just going to take this and just slide it under. I've actually never seen this part short out before, but it's just easier to just do it now than it is to deal with the problem later. All right, let's push it down, and that's it. So we got audio, controller. We still need to do the reset and hook up the other end of the controller on this. So when you route the controller over here, the other end of the controller flex, it stays to the same side going to the top. So I just come over here, lay it flat, like so, and just solder it on like that. Nothing special. And so if you're doing the direct wire method, you can run wires directly through these pads. So just reference the image, and that will get you set up. So if you burn this flex up, you easily can wire these in. It's not the end of the world. All right. And then we just have one more wire on the reset. So you're going to need a long piece of 30 gauge. Oh, excuse me. You need a, I don't know, probably, a foot. So take a pretty long piece of wire, strip one end of it, and we're going to solder it down here on the connector area where the controller is, or not where the controller, the power button. This is for the reset. We're going to solder to this pad right here, which I think is JL422. I think it's the same reference in all the schematics. So we're just going to solder that on and just kind of run the wire around. I'm going to route it underneath this chip, but you don't have to. But it needs to come back over to the flex area where we were just soldering. So you can see I just routed it underneath that just to kind of hold it down. You could hold it down with Captain if you wanted to. And then I'm just going to route it around. And we're going to, let's see if we can see it here, route it to this little spot. So we're just going to cut it. I usually strip the wires, but sometimes I'll do that method if it's a lot of wires or they're small and hard to cut. So add a little bit of solder this. And just make sure it routes away from these holes, because you don't want that to get pinched by the shield. So you can see my routing kind of goes in between these holes. And then this cable can just lay down. You just kind of bend it a little bit, and it'll lay semi-flat, straight, like that, and come on down here. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of a cleanup. Just going to use a real soft brush and just kind of clean up around it. Then I'm going to go over the top. What I'm doing here. Go over the top of this. Clean up anything. Still have a little bit of alcohol in there. It'll dry. Now that everything's dry, I'm going to go back in and do one last inspection. Because once I kind of test this, I don't want to have to solder on it again. So I'm just going to do a nice little visual inspection, real slow. Just go through all the spots there. Everything looks okay. I'm going to go back on the controller just to confirm. Those look okay. They look better in the scope eyepieces than on the scope, but I could do a little bit of cleanup. That looks a little nasty. This flux I use is non-corrosive, so even if I never clean it off, it won't cause any harm to the board. Some really tacky fluxes, what they call BGA flux, needs to go through an oven to burn off. Otherwise, it will be corrosive after, maybe like a year, a couple years of sitting. So with that said, the next step is to do a test. So let me switch back over to the overhead. All right, so we're back over here. Now, to test this, remember we have the screws in already for the heatsink. I can't state this enough, that if you set this power supply on top of this without this shield, this will destroy everything everything around you and possibly yourself. So make sure you use this. Before we do that, just bend the flex this way so it's just out of the way. Kind of follows that curve. And just put it like so. And then remember, put this down. If you do not put that down and you put this on, it's going to short out and it's going to fry everything. I can't even exaggerate that enough. And this is obviously a live main. And if you're in the EU, obviously 220. So be safe. So what I'm going to do is plug everything in. I'm going to hook up my analog. Analog is the key here. Because if analog does not work or it looks bad, then you have a short. It's just a quick way to test before we even plug anything into this. That if the analog is wrong, then you've got problems. So let me get a power cord here. Switch is off, okay? Because you can get obviously arcing across with just mains, so be careful, so leave that off. And then I'm also going to plug in a controller because a controller will allow us to double check we don't have any bridges on the controller line. So we're going to go ahead and plug our controller in. Make sure that this is pushed up like that. All right, and we've got our plastic shield in. Let me switch just have a little TV over here. Switch to AV, and let me power it up. Oh, I need to turn it on first. I'm assuming it's powered. All right. Yep, I've got Sony Computer Entertainment over here. Got good audio. And my controller works. So everything tested okay. The composite looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. And then make sure everything's depowered. Pull this off. Like I said, make sure this is depowered, aka I push the power button over here before touching this. That allows any caps to discharge their voltage. Because you don't really want to shock yourself. So next steps. Since this is confirmed working, we need to actually, plug this back in, getting ahead of myself here. We need to test the RetroGen in the setup now. Sorry, I didn't mean to do this. Put all this back on, that plastic shield. Clearly, I know from experience about this plastic shield. So, yeah, don't do that. It's a wild time. Anyways, plug this back in. I'm going to jump over to the scope real quick. There's some jumpers we need to set on the RetroGen board itself. First thing, we need to bridge my scope set up here. need a bridge C, D, and E. And if you got composite to come up, got a bridge there. If you got composite to come up, even if it looked bad, I would probably continue on because you may not know what pin to look at. So our kit will tell you which pin is not looking correct. All right, we just jump these, and then for the PS2, you just need to jump J. So each console has a different jumper setting. So just make sure it's the correct one. Refer to the guide for that. But for PS2, it's jumper J. And C, D, and E. And A is not relevant towards this. So let's jump back over to the overhead. And we're going to plug the gem in. Goes like this. The backer goes up, contacts go down. It just slides right in like that. Go ahead and power our PS2 again. And then we should, when we power this up, and remember this is a live circuit, so don't touch it just because it's sitting there. When I power this up, see I just got an LED. I should get a slow glow, which indicates it's just needs a monitor sense. So let me plug in a monitor here. I'm just going to rest it like that. I'm going to switch to my HDMI input. All right, so I've got controller and I've got OSD. And let me confirm. Let me go into the system here, debug self-test. See, I've got hearts on everything. So I think that we should be good. To open up the OSD, it's left, right, D-pad right, and circle, like that. That opens the OSD up. And so let's go ahead and kind of go back together since everything's set up. So first thing, power off. Make sure everything's depowered. Move back to my overhead here. All right, so we're just going to unplug the retro gen. So I just lost power in my house, so that's no bueno. So I'm going to have to pick this back up here in a second. All right, we're back. Power only went out for like 5 minutes, so luckily I'm recording on a laptop, so I didn't lose any of the previous stuff, and everything's back up. So yeah, so I got the board off. This is off. Let's get back to what we were doing. So we're going to go ahead and put the shields back on and mount the digital board. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this stuff. Make sure that this is decharged. Pull this off. Take this. Don't need composite anymore. All right. We'll grab our shield, which is right here, the top shield. We're just gonna set this back in. This lines up where we moved that little mountain before. And just put everything in. Oh, I'm an idiot. I was in a groove and then I ruined it. So I need to take this back out because I forgot something very minor, but it's a deal breaker. Need to pull these heatsink screws off. Shield goes back on. And this method is not necessarily, the way I'm doing it is not necessarily there could be a better way. I mean, just because this is the way I'm doing it doesn't mean it's like there's not a better way. So you might find something that fits you a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and screw all these back in. This is something called a little wow stick. It works pretty good. It's a little underpowered, but you know, it's kind of cheap, and this stuff should be underpowered, so it works well. Just going to go through and screw all these back in. Remember, these two screws right here are the ones with different threads. Here's the ones with different threads. It's a little bit coarser. Okay. Now that those are in, we can do a couple things. We need to plug the fan back in before we go too far. So I'm going to lift this up like I did before. And just kind of fold this down a little bit so it stays. And I'm just going to slide this guy up. It just kind of slides into place. It has a couple plastic grooves it sits in. And then I'm going to set this back down if I can. Back into this. And just kind of, it'll find its way in. So now we're back in right here. It's not screwed in, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and plug the fan in. And then, if you remember, we had this little screw we cut off the Toslink. It's going to go underneath that. So you need some type of spacer, or if you don't put the spacer back in, I would not even screw this back down, because if you screw it down without the spacer, it will kind of bend the shield, and it's just not something you want to do. So that's in there right there. So we're just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it like that. It's not screwed in, but we'll get to that when we flip it over. Because we'll want to do a test before we fully put everything back together. I can't probably stress enough that it's very wise to test multiple times as you're assembling this, because there's just a lot of steps. So make sure your shield goes back down. That goes over the wire. We're going to go ahead and set this board back on. Well, before we do that, let's get our shield. I think the shield goes actually underneath this, if I remember. So it's like that, and then this goes on. Remember that plastic bottom cover. And I'm just going to screw this back in right here. And I'm going to also plug this in so I don't forget. So now let's get to the mounting of the universal board and the 3D mount. So you have these two little blocks right here are for the 39,000. It allows you to flip the mount upside down. So this is going to sit like so, and it's going to come into contact. So verify there's no components in the way, and you might need to nudge some stuff over. I have seen one revision of this where this shield comes down too far and this shield needs to be cut. There's different ways to handle that. You could unscrew it, desolder it, and cut it. I just used some side cutters and cut it, but probably the best way is a Dremel. That's probably the easiest. Or get one of those PS2 things, and then it's no problem. But this one, most of the 5000 seem to be fine. So let's go ahead and assemble the gem board here. We're going to put in this little flip extension, and then we need our, it's just a little 3D printed mount that will slide in between it. Let's get this in here. And you're just lining it up and it just slides in. Actually, let me do this a different way. There we go. So it's just in there and then it just slides in. And it just kind of lines up. And it'll be a pretty tight fit, but that's by design. And we're just going to screw this in. Let me set this out of the way so you got a better view here. And these are also the M1.6 screws, by the way. And they're pretty small. So I'm just going to push this down as I'm screwing. I'll do it with a normal screwdriver here. And we're just going to thread it in through. Oops, just lost it. Be careful not to lose it. These screws are super small. An M2 screw will thread into this. So if you did need something now, you could make that work, but I would, you know, not recommend against that. So you're just kind of holding this as you screw this in, and then it'll just thread on through. So you're just going to thread the screw all the way through. And we're just going to do the same thing to the other side. And this will help pull the plastic on a little bit tighter, not allow it to go anywhere. So we're just going to kind of screw this in, raising it up a little bit, so we're going to pull it back down, make sure it threads all the way in. Just use a little bit of an angle. And then you can see we have the board in, both screws are out, it's connected up. Then we're going to take our 3D printed bracket. This is going to sit on top of this like this, and the screws are going to go in that hole. So go ahead and take your M1.6 nuts. They'll fit right in there like that. Just put your finger over it and then just thread it in and it'll just pull it automatically on down. And don't have to over tighten this, just to where it's tight. If you over tighten it, you'll just strip it. Not strip it, but strip the plastic. So just get it taut. And then before you screw this down, I recommend you put the antenna on. This will, it's hard, if this is mounted up and you put a lot of pressure on this, so it's better to just put your finger underneath it to support it and just press down. And it'll just clip on, like so. Okay. Now we're going to take this back like this. This is going to sit over, and you'll see where it lines up. Let me get this flex out of the way here. We're going to go back over here. Let me see how this is sitting here. This little relay's being a little burger. Okay, it looks like I've never encountered this power supply. So there's this little relay here, and it's making contact with the little just edge of this corner. So let's see if we can fix that. Obviously, looks like there's been multiple revisions of power supplies. Let's see what this looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat up these 2 pins and just bend this backwards. We only need to gain like a little bit of some clearance. Same thing with like these resistors right here, or these caps I mean. If they're in the way, move them back as well, but these should be fine. But I'm just going to slide this back. Let me go over to the overhead, or to the scope real quick, and we'll change it. Okay. Back on the scope, these are our points. I'm just going to apply a little bit of solder to loosen these up. I probably can just heat up one side at a time and just push it with my finger underneath. Yeah, easily. I'm just going to make sure that these joints are good. Now you can see what this looks like. It's bent now. Alright, let me jump back to over here. Okay, so you can see that just is kind of bent now. Just pushed out of the way. And you can see it clears it. No problems now. So let's screw these back in. And then use the same screws, the OEM screws. They'll drop in here. And just hold that down. And that should just automatically line up your HDMI in the spot it needs to be. Let's make sure everything looks okay. Yep. So the routing on this, there's a little bit different ways to do it. I kind of just, before you bend it actually, let's test it. I'm just going to let the cable sit like this. This will just sit right there. Let's do a quick test. Let's plug our cables in. Power on. We have the shield in. Just making sure everything's okay before I power it on. Let's switch to our mini. Power up. Okay, and we've got our video. So let's go ahead and go back to our overhead. We're going to turn it off. And then since we're working here, I'm just going to kind of do a lay like that. You can kind of see how that's laying. That'll just kind of keep it out of the way when we close the case. So when the case goes on, it'll just push that down and be fine. This can be routed in different areas. I have been routing it to this up front and then let the antenna hang off like that. So that's what I'm going to do on this one. Just going to go right there. And so there's still a few things we need to do. We're going to put the bottom back on. And make sure that it clears the HDMI. Then we're just going to flip it over. We're going to take the top back off. Remember, this guy likes to move. We're going to make sure our little spacer's in this one hole. This is where the spacer is, so make sure that's lined up. And I actually forgot to plug this back in. I shouldn't have unplugged that. Because this needs to go underneath. So there's no way to get that through. So we need to just do a little dance real quick. this will plug in. We'll rotate it around, lift up. All right, still gonna hold this, and before I put this in, I'm gonna screw this controller down because we are hopefully done. Okay, so now we're in. We're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and do a little quick test again just before we finish her up. Oh. Let me readjust this since that we're stuck on something here. Oh, I see. We're not sitting flat before we screwed that down. Let's see if I can pull this around. Nope, need to unscrew that. Let's try this again. I'm gonna swap cases. Like I said, I don't like to go around. I need this case to sit flush first. So let's make sure it sits flush before I commit. Okay, there we go. Now we're in. Let's go ahead and take this top back off. Screw this guy back in. Like I said, just never leave this thing open because if you start messing around and it's plugged in, it 100% is going to fall off that. I can't tell you how many times that I had to do that to realize that I myself can't even trust myself not to remember that. So I always screw it in. And so that's almost essentially the installation. I mean, we're pretty much ready to go. I'm going to put the top back on. And usually, I'll just put like a couple screws in here, and I'm going to test it for probably an hour. Let it run for an hour, get pretty hot, make sure there's no issues, and then let it cool down, and then test it again. And that's kind of what I do to confirm that it's good. So that should be it. So happy modding. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. Thanks for watching.